good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Free-for-All Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is October 6th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And if you want to follow me, I am live on blogtalkradio.com/Dan-Clements. The chat room is open over there. Or if you want to watch me on YouTube, I have the link up in the chat room there. But just go over to YouTube and type in the Dan Clements Show, and you'll see the live, and you can go on there. I also have a chat room opened up on the YouTube channel, so you can chat at me. I glance over and look at those. I don't always read all the comments, but sometimes I'll try to answer their comments after the show because I leave the chat room up, and I can go to your YouTube page and leave you a comment. The last time I got a couple comments that were kind of snarky, and I don't leave snarky responses back. I answer them in a friendly way. I don't denigrate anybody. I don't attack anybody personally like that. That's not who I am. It's not saying I couldn't be that way. It's just not who I am. I strive not to be that way and not to do that. Well, this whole week, before Sunday night, for me anyway, on the show, this whole week was going to take a whole nother tenor and tone and topics. And since Sunday night, we refocused the show because I think it's important that we keep up with current events. And not that I want to dictate to you on how you need to think about things. That's never, ever my intention here at the show, although I have detractors of this show that think because I'm a Christian and I'm a conservative and I have a radio show that I'm forcing my opinions and my views on people. I still haven't figured out how that one works, because if I could figure out how that one actually works, folks, I would have a lot more viewers on the show, because that actually means if I could force my opinions on folks, that means I could force people to listen to me. Honestly, I don't think folks in the anti-freedom camps really think things out too much. And folks, if you're honest, and I have to say this, and it's not that I'm trying to say some folks out there are dishonest. That's up to you. But what I'm saying, if you take an honest look at what I used to use, the left-right paradigm. If you're new to the show, I'm getting new listeners almost daily. If you're a new listener to the show, I used to use the left-right paradigm, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the Founding Fathers' idea of, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and all the writings surrounding that. It doesn't fit with the Enlightenment mentality about having, these folks are conservative, therefore they're on the right, and these folks are liberal or progressive, so therefore they're on the left. Because there are intermingled amongst both of those, if you want conservatives who are liberal and liberals who are conservative. So to me, I've always questioned that. And up until recently, I hadn't really figured it out until a couple months ago. And it's not about left or right. It's about whether you are for freedom and liberties and the protections of those and the exercising of those freedoms and liberties by everybody. But particularly, we're talking about Americans, and our freedoms and liberties are protected from intrusion by the federal government because of our Bill of Rights, by the state government because of our Bill of Rights, by local governments because of our Bill of Rights, and from other citizens because of our Bill of Rights. We have protected rights. The Founding Fathers and the Framers recognized that we have natural rights or God-given rights that need to be protected. And just because it's stated in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean those protections stop when somebody else, like an individual, comes up and says, no, I'm not going to allow you to exercise those rights. We've seen this fight coming with Black Lives Matters, with Antifa, that they are literally destroying the rights of other citizens because in their minds, because they don't agree with what's being said, that it's okay for them to disenfranchise somebody of their rights, take away their rights of freedom of speech, especially when when someone's been invited to speak, when rental fees have been paid, and other security considerations have been paid. Yet there's groups out there like Antifa and Black Lives Matters that feels that it's within their rights to shut down somebody else's right. And that's where we're at today. And this thing about, I know I've been talking a lot about guns this week because that's what that's what happened in Las Vegas shooting, at the Mandalay Bay casino. 59 people lost their lives. Over 500 people were injured, and it was due to guns. But the gun was the tool. And maybe I'm being a little too simplistic in my arguments about it's more of a heart thing than it is a gun thing. The gun is a tool, just like any other tool out there. Yesterday on the show, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more today, not a lot, but a little bit more today. I got a lot of news I want to go through that I hadn't gotten through during the week here. That's as important. It's not overriding, but it's as important as a country, about the drug use. And we're talking about prescription drugs. We're talking about antidepressants, antipsychotic medications. And I have an article here you can go read about. I'm not going to read it except for the first couple paragraphs in it over at WorldNet Daily News. And I shared you a Lou Rockwell piece by Andy Gary over at LouRockwell.com, The Mass Shooting Problem. He's talking about it's a huge drug problem. All the mass shootings, that means 4 people or more. And there was another one just yesterday. And I'm not going to get into that, but it was in the news this morning. There were 4 people were killed, and they were looking for the gunman. But someone has gone through and looked at the police reports and the histories of these folks, and one common denominator of all these mass shootings has been prescription drugs, antidepressants, antipsychotics, ADD medications, stuff like that. I can't remember the exact one I was on for my fibromyalgia. It was working great. I felt great. My muscles didn't ache. I was able to work. And out of the blue, I was on that for about 3 weeks, almost a month. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, I woke up one day and I was getting ready to go to work, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I was having a panic attack. I'm semi-claustrophobic. And it really brought that out bad. For a day and a half, almost 2 days, I suffered with that till the medicine was out of my system. So I know that medicines can really alter your body's chemistry. And this is one thing that we're not dealing with. We're not talking about it because it's not. One thing, it's not glamorous. 2, they're prescription drugs, so people just assume that doctors know what the side effects are. 3, and this is something that can be debated. I'm still on the fence about this. However, there has to be some type of mechanism that kicks in where we can still protect the person's privacy, but at the same time, if they're being prescribed these medicines, certain medicines, and they can go through some of these reports like I've been reading, if they're being prescribed these medicines, that they need to voluntarily give up their weapons. And let me tell you how this could happen. I had a friend, I won't say any names, I had a friend that was involved in some domestic dispute and some violence. And here in Pennsylvania, they are allowed by law to temporarily confiscate the weapons that are in that house. Matter of fact, I had borrowed one of his weapons for hunting, a rifle. And because even though it wasn't in his house, they knew about it. They had a list because the person voluntarily gave him a list, and the county sheriff contacted me, and I had to deliver it up to the sheriff's office at that particular county. And honestly, personally, I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, there's a lot of people out there that might disagree with it on Second Amendment issues. Folks, if you do something like commit domestic violence, I think the last thing you need in your home is a gun. Now, I think the best of all worlds is if you give your guns up to a friend and allow them to hold them until things are squared away. But I look at it as no different from child services coming in and removing a child from a harmful home as it is removing weapons from a harmful home. Take that temptation out of the way and let the folks deal with it. Once they get the problems dealt with and things are better, yeah, give them back. You can't sell them off, you can't hold them forever, but give them back because they proved themselves. Somehow, some way, I think we need to do the same thing with certain prescription drugs. That if your doctor puts you on them, now I don't think your doctor needs to know that you have guns. But that should be entered in some type of secure database that if you are a permit holder or if you've had background checks for buying guns, that those guns need to come out of that home. I'm not saying it has to be a government official that has to come in and do that, but some way there has to be some type of proof that those guns coming out of that home, that person does not have access to those firearms. Because there's a disturbing trend that has been developing. One, we're totally over-medicated in this country. We really are. And two, even doctors don't know all the side effects. The medicine they put me on, they said I shouldn't. I had a doctor, a rheumatologist, tell me that it may not have been a panic attack because those medicines don't normally do that. But it's the same type of medicine or family medicine that they know that it does that with. And you don't know the individuals, how they're chemically going to react to medicines. So doctors don't even know. And if there's a pattern behavior caused by drugs, wouldn't it be, and like I said, this is just a question. I'm still on the fence about this, but wouldn't it be better for everybody concerned that guns are not in the mix? Guns are not in the mix. Now, if someone's going to kill themselves, they don't necessarily need a gun to do it. You heard me talk. If you haven't heard me talk before, I've talked about this before. I had a baby brother who committed suicide, and it wasn't with a gun. It was with the medicine that he was using. He wasn't taking all his meds, and he hoarded them, and he took them. And it was a bad situation, and definitely bad for him because he lost his life. Bad situation for the family because it leaves us asking questions. Why did this have to happen? And the biggest question I have, why was he even on medication? If you read some of the side effects of some of these medications that they put, these antidepressants and these bipolar medications, stuff like that, the side effects are worse than the disease for the most part, or can be. Not everybody experiences all the same side effects or any side effects. I'm just saying, I read some of these side effects and I'm like, I'd rather deal with the disease than I would the medications that could elevate the suicidal thoughts. And that on that medicine that I had the panic attacks, that was one of the side effects that could happen. And yet I have a doctor tell me, I don't think that may not have been a panic attack. I don't know what it was. If it wasn't, I've been panicked a few times in my life. I really have. And so I know what panic is. And if I was being panicked that I felt like the walls were closing on me, like this big transparent bubble that was coming on me and I couldn't push it back out. And I was panicking, and it was just compounding everything. Anyway, getting back to my original point, it's not a gun thing. And it's not simply just a heart thing. I don't want people to come away with the idea, though, we just have to change our hearts, and that's okay. Because if it was simply a heart thing, then alcoholics could still keep alcohol in the house and just change their heart. But that's not necessarily the case. You have to take the temptation out of the way. Alcoholics will tell you, somebody that is been diagnosed with alcoholism and has gone through the process of cleaning themselves up and been sober for so many years will tell you it's still a temptation to them. So they don't put themselves in a situation where they're alone with alcohol, period, which means they don't have it in their house. I have a friend who's a salesperson who on occasion is around alcohol, but he's never by himself. He's never by himself, and his associates know that he's an alcoholic because he doesn't hide it. It's the same way with pornography. Used to be you had to go to a store and buy books and stuff like that. That's not the case anymore. We have easy access to it on the internet. So there are things you can do to prevent that. There's ISPs out there. I use, and this is not an advertisement for hedge builders, but I use hedge builders for my computers. We have it on our church computer. We have our Wi-Fi locked down at the church. I have my Wi-Fi locked down at the house that if only you have a password can you get on my internet system. And my computers are locked down. And it takes away the temptation. It removes the temptation. Now, someone has a problem with pornography, do I still have thoughts about that? Yeah, but if I take the temptation away from that, it makes it easier for me to cope with that. The same way with, again, if someone's intent on committing suicide, they're going to commit suicide no matter how much you change their heart or their mind. But to take away some of the instruments of doing, like guns, which the vast majority of gun deaths in America are by suicide. We talked about this earlier in the week. But that doesn't mean if we take away the guns that they're not going to commit suicide. That would be silly to even think that. Again, it's not a gun thing, it's a medication thing. And the idea, and like I said, I don't want anybody to come away with the idea that I call it's a heart thing, not a gun thing. That has a lot to do with that. I was raised to have a healthy respect for weapons. The only reason why I use gun is because that's the common term that folks use. But my dad never used the term guns. He always talked about them as being weapons. They are weapons. And in the military, we were taught they are weapons. They are weapons of war. Pistols are weapons of war. Let me back up. They are weapons of war, but they are also instruments of self-defense. Okay? A lot of time in war, just to show a force will stop an enemy from coming after you. Just to show a force that you have the weapons, you're trained and willing to use them. Don't make me use them. I will, but don't make me use them. Don't force me in a situation where I have to defend myself to use those weapons. Okay? These mass shootings that we're experiencing in the last 50, 60 years, they are not a have to. Don't force me into shooting. Don't force me into using these weapons or I'll use them. It's not that scenario at all. We have these lone wolves out there, even though ISIS is still claiming, and ISIS is still claiming that this was a ISIS attack, and there's no evidence of this. But these lone wolves, they're not being backed into a corner to commit these atrocities. And again, definition of a mass shooting in America is 4 or more people die in a single event. That's a mass shooting. And there's too many of them. There's way too many of them in the United States, okay? There's way too many of them in the world. But again, the problem is it's not the gun. And it's Dave, my friend Dave, you hear me talk about him all the time on the show. He sends me emails and thoughts, not a lot, but every now and then something really hits him. And he was laying out these arguments that I'm actually putting forth to you. And again, this is as much to him as it is to you. I never meant it to be that if we just fix men's hearts, that everything else is going to be okay, because it's not. That's a good step. If we turn this around from being a godless society and turn this society back to God, that's not going to fix everything. It'll go a long way to fixing things, but it'll never fix everything. And just like I talked earlier in the week, the idea that some folks have, especially a lot of people on the anti-freedom side of things that belong to these ethical societies or these atheists and stuff, they don't believe in evil. They don't believe in the concept of evil. And what's that old saying, I don't believe in the devil, but he believes in you? Well, you may not believe in evil, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean it may not affect your life. Just because we don't believe. So when I'm talking about these things, hopefully you never get the idea that I want to isolate it down to just one thing. That's never my intent on the show. I don't have, and nobody else does either, I don't have the time every time I turn on my mic and produce this show live to go over every little point that I ever want to make in that one show. If I'm dealing with, and I'll just go back to it's a heart thing, not a gun thing. If I'm dealing with that concept, that doesn't mean it's to the exclusion of everything else. If I'm talking about this being a godless society and what we can do to fix that, I'm not excluding everything else from the equation. Because there are a lot of good people out there that live their lives and they don't harm anybody, they try not to do anybody else wrong, but yet they're not Christians either. And there's different subjects we can take on within that realm or with any realm we're talking about, with any issue that we're talking about. So hopefully I don't come off, and if I do, I apologize for this, that I don't come off as, well, if you take care of this issue, it'll take care of everything. And that's just not the case. There's a lot of things that are involved in that. And basically what happens in our society today, and this isn't anything new. I mean, this has been going on. If you read through your Old Testament, this has been going on for thousands of years, that most of the times in societies, we treat the symptoms and not the cause of the problem. Okay? When Jesus was talking about the Pharisees and all the things that they were doing wrong according to scriptures, what the Pharisees were doing, it was a symptom of a much deeper and more harmful thing to the Jewish people. The way they carried out the feasts, the Feast of the Tabernacle, the Passover feast, things like that. Oh, we've kept these things. Okay, you've kept those things, but what else did you neglect? And you may have kept those things, but you were disobedient in a lot of other things. And God has, several times in the Old Testament, God said, I demand obedience more than sacrifice. And the sacrifice, the Old Testament sacrificial system was very, very important to worshiping God. For the children of Israel to participate and get it right and worship God with. But to God, it wasn't the most important thing. Obedience was the most important thing. That was the root cause, was their lack of obedience. And the idea that, again, I don't want to make these isolated issues. I don't want to say, well, this is the cause and not this the cause. I was speaking yesterday on the show where I said, I got one of the laziest guns in the world. I can set it next to my front door and it never does anything. Doesn't protect the house. Doesn't shoot the UPS guy when he comes and deliver things to the door. Nothing. Must be a worthless gun. And I went on to talk about how we need human interaction to cause that weapon to do what it does. For that weapon, for a pistol, for a rifle to function properly, besides being mechanically sound, it needs a human operator. And folks, I've read comments throughout the week where, other folks have said the same thing I just said. Well, you know what? You can set that up and you can remotely do that. But you still need a person, a human being, to set that up and someone to push a remote button to fire that weapon. You don't get people out of that equation. But never construe that to say that guns aren't the problem. They're just a symptom of a larger problem. And one of the larger problems that's actually rearing its head, and very little folks are talking about this, is the drug use. I was watching the news last night and this morning, and they're talking about it. Hasn't been confirmed, but they're reporting that he was on some antidepressive drugs, which have a side effect of making people more aggressive. Okay? Now, is that the case or not? I don't know. We're still waiting on everything to come back. They haven't had time to run the whole toxicology yet, let alone anything else on that. So I just wanted to put that out. And, I never, ever mean to downplay something or belittle something, or to say, just because I said this doesn't mean there's other things coming in that. And I know when Dave emails me these, and this isn't the first time, and he'll email me other times, he's sort of like my Jiminy Cricket, as it were. I say this in jest. He's my bald Jiminy Cricket. Okay? Because Jiminy Cricket was a cricket. Didn't have any hair, did he? I know Dave's going to get me back for that. I know in my heart of hearts he's going to get me back for that comment. Today's show is being brought to you by Bluehost. They're an affiliate marketer of mine. If you go to danclementshow.com and click on the Bluehost widget top of the page, it'll take you to their portal. And in doing so, if you buy your hosting service through my link, that'll help support this show. Plus, you'll be getting a fantastic product. The danclementshow.com show notes page is actually being hosted on Bluehost. They have good deal, back-to-school deals going on still right now. You get a free domain. You get free site builder. You get one-click WordPress install, and you get 24/7 support. Those last two things I can't talk enough about. The 24/7 support. I had used them late in the evening, to ask a question, got my question answered, and easy peasy lemon squeezy. But the other thing, the one-click WordPress, I use a lot of WordPress plugins to make my website work. Fantastic. And matter of fact, the WordPress plugins, if you take the time to read the documentation, they will tell you if they will interact well with the version of your web theme version. It'll tell you if it interacts well with that, and if it doesn't, you'll definitely know, and then you go back and do some troubleshooting to either take it out or adjust things on it. But it's real easy, folks. Blue hosting is real easy. If you have an idea or a web project, a blog, or whatever you want to do, go to bluehost.com and you can get your presence out on the internet, and again, you'll have a fantastic experience with that. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 16, verses 4 through 8. But these things I have told you, that when the time comes, you may remember that I told you of them. And these things I do not say to you at the beginning, because I was with you. But now I go away with him who sent me, and none of you ask me, where are you going? But because I have said these things, you are sorrow-filled to your heart. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is to your advantage that I go away, and if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you, and if I depart, I will send him to you, and when he comes, he will convict the world of sin and righteousness and judgment. Again, talking about Jesus had to go away. He must needs to go away in order for the Holy Spirit to come. If Jesus would have stayed, the Holy Spirit would have never been able to come. Today's quote meal comes from an unknown author. A gem cannot be polished without friction. The child of God cannot be perfected without adversity. And again, it goes back to this idea that Lieutenant Matthews told me about so many years ago. God never promised to take us out of the storms of life, but he did promise that he would lead us through them. Today's short Bible lesson actually comes from G.E. Watkins himself, from gewatkins.net. Fathers, teach your children. And this is a good article. It just popped up in my email, but it's a good article for what we're talking about all week here, about some of these. And like I said, there's not just one thing you can point to with the issues we have here in America, but this is a good one that we need, fathers need to try to get right. Fathers, teach your children in the way they should go. We need to teach them responsibility. We need to teach them respect. We need to teach them, godly things. I'm a Christian. I need to teach my son godly things. Or my daughter, godly things. Teach our children. We need to sit down with our wives and we need to study the scriptures so we can show ourselves approved to God. So we know what it means to be a Christian, what it takes to be a Christian. So I think it's a good, I read over that. It's a very good lesson by G.E. Watkins himself. So I encourage you to go over and read that. Now, let's see where we want to go here. I have a couple articles in here that you may be interested in, and if I have time, I'll come back and do them. But we've been spending a lot of time this week on what happened in Las Vegas at the Jason Aldean concert. And I don't want to belabor it too much more here, but there is an article that you can go read. It's very good. It's use of firearms for self-defense is an important crime deterrent by Alyssa Tabaran. And she posted this back in July 17th of 2013, and it still holds true today. It still holds true today that these are a deterrent. And let me make another point here, because I'm going to bring up Michael Moore's call of repeal of this ancient, outdated Second Amendment. There is an idea afoot out there that the Second Amendment back in the day was a good deterrent against the British Empire. And that's true. And there are a lot of folks that believe, along the same line as Michael Moore, that maybe we don't need the Second Amendment anymore, because they were talking about a tyrant back then, and do we really need that protection today? We don't live with these tyrannies. Excuse me. We don't live under these tyrannies, and yet the Second Amendment may or may not apply today, because a lot of people just don't see the tyranny, and that the defensive use against government may not be as big now as it was back then. My only question, and I'm pretty sure history's on my side in this in the last 100 years, that every time weapons were confiscated from the people, that it allowed tyranny to flourish, because the people could not defend themselves. And the fact that our government, and it is true, our government are usurping our authority, our rights, our freedoms, our liberties on a daily basis. They really are. But I don't think it's to the point where people are going to rise up with weapons and try to overthrow the government. Because I don't think, and there's some people think that we're beyond that point, that it needs to happen. I don't think we're even close to that point yet, because there's still some constitutional remedies that haven't been taken yet. One of them is the Convention of the States. With the Convention of the States, we could literally and physically right the ship of state here in the United States, correct some of the deficiencies of the Constitution that George Mason said, one of the supporters of the Article 5 Convention of the States, said that might need to be triggered in the future, because they admitted that we're just men, we're not perfect, and that we may not got the whole thing right. And so future generations may have to correct things, especially if the government isn't willing to do it themselves. So again, I don't think we're at that point for armed rebellion against the United States government. However, you got to think in the back of folks' minds, just like Admiral Hirohito, I believe that was his last name, from Japan, warned the Emperor of Japan that the Emperor of Japan wanted him to make plans to invade the United States, the continental United States. And he warned the Emperor, so if we do that, we're going to be fighting a weapon behind every blade of grass. And that's just as true back then in World War II as it is today. And I have to believe there are some people in government that have that in the back of their mind, especially folks who are of the mindset that we have to control the people. And folks, there are politicians out there that believe this. Bernie Sanders is one of them. He's a self-avowed socialist. And socialists are about controlling the people, because socialists believe that you and I are not capable of ordering our affairs and living our lives in the best way we think. Now, the way we think is too individualistic for socialists. And so disparage folks of that mindset. A few elitists have to control everything because we're not smart enough and we're not good enough, or whatever you put the adjective in there, to do these things on our own. And so I have to believe in the back of my mind that this weighs. This is part of their thought process, and it weighs on them about this. If we push too hard and the American people still have guns, will they revolt with those weapons? If you are a socialist and are intent on taking over the country, all of its institutions, and everything socialism entails, you have to be mindful of that. That has to be on your mind. I mean, Venezuela is a good example. They're taking the weapons away from the people and have took them away. What do the people have to fight back with? Rocks and sticks against weapons. You don't get very far doing that. And again, I'm not calling for an armed revolt. Like I said, I don't think we're at that point yet. I don't think enough Americans have lost their freedoms under the United States federal government and some state governments to the point to where they haven't thought that they've exhausted all legislative type answers or remedies for the problems in the United States. Again, I don't think we're that far. And I think, but again, yesterday I read on the show, why do we have a Second Amendment? It's not, again, it is, I titled the show today, and I may change this, but I think I got it right. Is it rights or control? It can't be both. And whether we're talking about, in recent times, whether we're talking about the First Amendment and other citizens trying to control the free speech, and I'll just deal with free speech, trying to control the free speech of other citizens, which is unconstitutional, it's immoral, and it's wrong to be doing that, or whether it's the right to defend ourselves, whether we're talking about a home invasion, whether we're talking about it out in the public square, do we have a right to defend ourselves, or should the government be able to control that to the point where we don't have the ability to defend ourselves? We don't have the ability to speak out. We don't have the ability to assemble. We don't have the ability to worship God as we see fit. Again, is it rights or is it control? Which one do you want? Because you can't have both. Either the people have freedoms and liberties and they exercise them as long as they're not aggressing against somebody else and stomping on their rights, i.e. Black Lives Matter and Antifa, the way they're going about what they're doing. They are aggressing against other citizens and their freedoms and their rights that they have. As long as we're not doing that, everything should be all hunky-dory. Everything should be hunky-dory. But again, there's a lot of folks out there, there's a mindset out there when it comes to money that you didn't make that on your own, you didn't get there by yourself, and I don't think anybody ever thinks that. But a lot of people do that without the help of government, in spite of regulations in government. They make themselves or family a decent living. They may build a company and hire other people so they can make a decent living and support their families. You see where I'm getting at with this? It's about rights over control. I would rather, as I said a couple days ago on Wednesday's show, I'd rather live in a dangerous freedom than I would a comfortable slavery or servitude. Because even in a free society, let's say everything was working the way the founders thought about the Constitution. We had term limits. We had all these other checks and balances. We got rid of the 17th Amendment and went back to the states appointing the senators to the federal government so they can have a checks and balance, and had everything as perfectly as humanly possible. Would there still be problems in the United States? Yes. I can be living my life in perfect harmony with God's will, in perfect harmony with the principles of freedom and liberty, i.e., treating others as I would treat myself or have them treat me. Let me back that up. I treat others as I would have them treat me, which means I'm not going to aggress against somebody and take away or diminish their freedoms and liberties because I don't want them doing the same thing to me. And that's a biblical principle. And like it or not, the folks that just hate it when I talk about this, I've actually had people tell me that when you mix politics and religion, that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm not part of the government. I'm not an elected official. I am a United States citizen. I have certain God-given rights, and one of those, freedom of speech. So that means I can talk about anything I want. Doesn't mean you have to listen. Again, it goes to the beginning of the show. Doesn't mean I can force you to listen. Because if I could force you to listen, I'd have a lot more subscribers to my YouTube channel than I do now, or my Blog Talk Radio show here. Okay? So there is still the idea, and I have to believe this because I've seen too much evidence to the contrary, that even the most ardent socialist in the United States of America has to have that in the back of their mind, that if they push too hard, they could trigger an armed revolt here in the United States. And in order to prevent that, they have to work very, very hard of taking away the people's ability to defend themselves. Like I said, I'm not worried about the government yet coming in to the point and trampling my freedoms and my liberties to the point that I feel I have to get my weapons out to defend myself and my family and my friends. I'm not at that point. Am I aware that that point could be coming somewhere in the future? I'm aware of it, but can I put my finger on when it's going to be? No. You know, there's going to be a lot of things that would have to lead up to that, for me anyway, to actually join into something like that, if ever. If ever. But there still is that. It talks about this article I was sharing or telling you about with Alyssa Tabaran, important crime deterrent. It's also a deterrent for tyrants. It's a deterrent against tyrants. Tyrants do not like weapons in the hands of the people. If you look, and history's on my side, from Nazi Germany to Mussolini's Italy to Lenin's Russia and Stalin's Russia to Mao's China to Pol Pot's Cambodia and any other despot or tyrant in the world today, what's one thing in common that they have with all the tyrants of history? They've taken the weapons out of the hands of their citizens. I mean, that's a fact. All right, there's a couple articles here. I reposted. I'm reposting the one from Adam Gary about the mass shooting problem. He's talking about the drug problem. I also added the one in the links right after that one, the big list of drug-induced killers by Leo Holman over at WND.com. I read through that. It's scary. That article, I don't scare easy, but that one scares me because of the amount of prescriptions that are actually in the country today, how much these things are prescribed. I just want to read the first part of this. Leo says here, as WMD has reported, Charleston church shooter Dylan Roof was a known drug user who was caught with the powerful mind-altering narcotic Suboxone when apprehended by police during an incident on February 28th. Now, this was written back in 2015. Suboxone is used to treat addiction to opioid drugs such as heroin. Its adverse effects includes anxiety, irritability, depersonalization, confusion, suicidal thoughts, and irrational, sometimes violent behavior. Other drugs linked to mass killers have more often been geared towards treating mental illness, according to a data set of U.S. mass shootings from 1982 to 2012, prepared by Mother Jones Magazine, of 62 mass shootings carried out by 64 shooters. The majority of the shooters, 41, were noted to have signs of possible mental illness, the precise kinds of mental illnesses that psychotropic medications are prescribed for. It is a well-documented fact that in the 1980s, a shift occurred in the direction of treating the mentally ill. Rather than institutionalize them, the preferred method was to mainstream them, encouraging them to function in society while being treated with a mind-numbing array of new antidepressants being developed by the pharmaceutical industry. WND has compiled a list of killings committed by persons who had used mind-altering drugs or recently came off of them at the time of their crimes. And they go down through a whole list of these. And again, I was skimming over these, and these stats really scare me. Now, when they talk about the back in the 80s, about the mid-80s, there was a shift in the treatment of mentally ill. This coincided with a lot of special needs folks, I'll call them, special needs adults, where they've actually gone through and shut down whole institutions and emptied these out and put these folks in a residential setting. My wife works for a company that does this. I used to back in the 2008, 9, and part of 2010, work for a company where I was the house dad. I was in a residential setting taking care of these folks. And some of these folks were on pretty potent antidepressants or antipsychotic medications. And there were more than one time, and I'm not going to divulge any specific information, but there was more than one time I had to deal with folks that were on these, and it wasn't a pleasant experience at all. But there was this thing to mainstream everybody, and there is today some folks in these group homes that should not be there. And is the best answer to institutionalize them? No. However, that's the only answer we have right now on some of these folks. And some of these the Laurel Center out towards State College on Route 45, huge mental institution, shut down. Everybody was dispersed. The worst cases were put into smaller facilities that were more tightly controlled, and yet those facilities are almost overflowed. And so this move to try to normalize folks that aren't normal, when you don't, and this is the problem, and this again is a symptom of what's happening in our society. Too often in our society, everybody gets lumped in the same category. You know, I say special needs adults. My daughter's a special needs adult, but she's not on any of these mind-altering drugs. So how can you put her into a group of folks that are? And they know the ones that are. And again, I think down the line there's going to be there's been a lot of incidences, and I think down the line there's going to be even more, to the point where they're going to have to rethink their strategy a little bit. But this, like I said, the guns aren't the problems. It's not just a heart thing. We are seeing something that's coming out of these mass shootings, and I think Las Vegas is really going to bring this to a head. At least I hope it does, to where we can have a rational conversation about what's truly behind these mass shootings. What's truly behind these mass shootings. And the more I'm reading about it, drugs are being linked to too many of these. And I think this is a driving problem. Some of these antidepressants out there actually drive people. We have a high suicide rate here in the United States. These drive people to kill themselves. And it's a side effect of the medication. And it's not good. It really isn't good. All right, let's get into some less serious things here. Pat Sajak of Wheel of Fortune. Used to love watching that show with Vanna White and trying to spell the words out, or try to figure them out before the contestants did. And I always liked that show, always liked Pat Sajak. He is a conservative. But you also heard me talk earlier this week about Jimmy Kimmel on the Late Show. I can't remember which one he took over, the Tonight Show, and I don't care because I don't watch him much anymore. But anyway, Pat Sajak. Let me get over here. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this thing. So it's not as big. Okay. Pat Sajak takes out Jimmy Kimmel and other leftist celebrities with one hilarious tweet. And again, I like Pat Sajak. He's, he's a thinker. He really, really is. Pat Sajak, the host of Wheel of Fortune and a very funny man, issued a tweet in the wake of the plethora of uninformed opinions offered by self-important celebrities. Need we mention Jimmy Kimmel? In response to the Las Vegas massacre. Pat Sajak, on October 4th. Okay, let me explain this again. We're celebs. We're wiser and more empathetic than you. We are famous. Please take our opinions more seriously. And this is what Pat Sajak said. I love it. I love it, right? This is not the first time Sajak, a political conservative, has lanced a celebrity bubble of leftism that pervades Hollywood. His resume should have been a warning to leftists that his wit would target them. Sajak is an external director of the conservative publishing house Eagle Publishing, serves on the board of trustees at Hillsdale College, and has served on the board of directors for the Claremont Institute. Here are some other examples of Sajak's pointedly targeting the left. Looking forward to the next awards show lecture. Nobody abhors violence more than Hollywood, and nobody does more to glorify it. That was January 11th of this year. I wonder if the celebrities who moved out of the country will return for the demonstrations. Unhappy about the results of last week's People's Choice Awards, thinking of breaking Starbucks windows and trashing limos. And that was back on January 21st, 2017, around the inauguration of President Trump. I thought that was funny. I thought that was really funny. Changing the world one screamed obscenity at a time. Alexa, turn on CNN. I want to hear the news. You'll have to pick one or the other. I love that one. Does anyone have thinner skins than the tough news media? January 13, 2017. So we have here, again, Jimmy Kimmel came out. He was crying. Whether that was genuine or not, I'll let you decide, about what happened in Las Vegas. And then they go in and start talking about, he goes on a rant and he starts talking about a lot of things. I put a link up to the show earlier this week to Steven Crowder, who debunked the Kimmel rant that night. I'm working on one right now, rebuttal to it, a little cleaner than Steven's is. But anyway, I'm working on that right now. I'm hoping to have that done over the weekend. But it amazes me. It amazes me how much these celebrities, how well they think of themselves, that they're self-important. I go back to his first one. Okay, and this is Pat Sajak saying this. Okay, let me explain this again. We're celebs. We're wiser, more empathetic than you. We are famous. Please take our opinions more seriously. If they're well informed, and I get in these discussions a lot, especially with folks on the left, if it's okay to have opinions, but if you want your opinions to be taken seriously, they have to be informed opinions. They have to be truthful and they have to be fact-filled. Now, my opinion is I think the color blue is the best color on the color wheel. That opinion is a personal preference. It's amoral. It's neither good nor bad. And if you have a different opinion that you think brown is the best color on the color wheel, which I think you're wrong, that's still your opinion, because that is a personal preference. But if I give you an opinion that, and you pick it, there is a God. My opinion is there is a God, and there's enough evidence out there to back that up in Scripture, in nature, and combined. That's an informed, fact-filled, truthful opinion. George Washington existed, and my opinion of him was he was a good president. Now, again, you might have a different opinion. I tell you what, let's bring it up a little bit further to Lincoln. There's a lot of people that have a positive opinion and say that Lincoln was a very good president. I like Abraham Lincoln, but as a president and as a protector of the Constitution of the United States, I have to give him an F. In my opinion, he was a very bad president. Most people don't look beyond his Emancipation Proclamation where he freed the slaves. Did you know that he suspended habeas corpus? Did you know he put quite a few reporters and owners of papers in jail because they had a negative attitude towards Lincoln, and especially when they started talking about he suspended habeas corpus and he did all these other things that were against the law and the Constitution. He put them in jail for sedition. So in that regard, Abraham Lincoln was not a very good president, no matter what else he did. And we can sit there and debate that, but let's debate it on facts, and that would be something that we can actually go back and look at on the facts if people want to do that. So just because you're famous and you're in Hollywood and you have an opinion doesn't necessarily mean that opinion's correct. Doesn't necessarily mean you're the smartest pencil in the, in Hollywood or anywhere else, any room you might be standing in. Doesn't necessarily mean you're the smartest or sharpest pencil in the box. I don't think it's ever meant that. And that's what Pat Sajak is trying to say here. Michael Moore. You gotta love him. You just gotta love him, right? If you don't know who Michael Moore is, he's a documentarian. He creates documentaries which are, to say the least, less than fact-filled. They come from a particular point of view. They come from a particular narrative, and they usually live inside an echo chamber. He did something about the health system down in Cuba, which he left a lot of facts out, because that was his point, was to build up and say it was a good thing to have single-payer health care. He's pointing to Cuba as the model, but then he doesn't tell you the whole truth. He leaves, by omission, he leaves a lot of the facts and truth out. So Michael Moore this week, and just so you know, I have this set up as a reading page. I'll take it back over because it's easier to do it here, just to show you. Let me get in here on the desktop view, just to show you what's going on here. This is Michael Moore's Facebook page. Now, you're not going to see Michael Moore's face because my face is in front of there. There you go. You'll see Michael Moore's face right there. This is his Facebook page, and this was on his Facebook October 4th. And it's just easier for me to read this in the reading pane than it is, or reading view, than it is on Facebook. My proposal to repeal the Second Amendment and replace it with this. This is his proposal. Proposed 28th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, a well-regulated state National Guard being helpful to the security, safety and security of the United States, or of the state in times of need. Again, that's a very subjective term, their need. We'll talk about this a little bit. Along with the strictly regulated right of the people to keep and bear a limited number of non-automatic arms for sport and hunting, with respect to the primary right of all the people to be free from gun violence, this shall not be infringed. Now, a couple things in there. A well-regulated state National Guard. Being helpful. Okay, that's a very subjective term. I'm just going back over to the my little Constitution here. My PDF printed out Constitution. The actual Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state. The framers of the Constitution said this is necessary, a well-regulated militia. But you got to go back, and we talked about this on yesterday's show, you got to go back and see what the founders, how they defined militia. In a state, the militia are the people, particularly men between 16 and 60. That's the militia. It's not the National Guard. People get those, they conflate both of those, and it's just, that's not the fact. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Now, the Founding once thought that the Second Amendment was about sport or hunting. Not once. Matter of fact, for the most part, the founding fathers, when it talked about the well-regulated militia, and that's we the people that live in the state, 16 to 60 men, age folks that were male, made up the militia. It was necessary. Now, Michael Moore says it's helpful to the safety and security of a state in times of need, along with the strictly regulated right of the people to bear a limited number of non-automatic arms for sport and hunting. Again, the Second Amendment, this is where, this is their narrative, their talking points that they put out. The Second Amendment was never about hunting and sports. It was about the people being able to defend themselves against a tyrant or exterior threats to the state, external threats to the state that they were residing in. It was never, ever about hunting and fishing, or hunting and sport, I should say. Of course, I've heard of people using guns to fish with, but that's not a real practical way to do it. But that's a whole other story. And he goes on down through here. He says, Michael Moore, along with all who support an end to this epidemic of gun violence, propose a new amendment to our Constitution that repeals the ancient and outdated Second Amendment, which was written before bullets and revolvers were even invented. Wrong. They had multiple shot weapons even back in colonial times. Don't let the anti-freedom folks out there tell you any different. That's searchable, knowable, and understandable. And as far as bullets, he needs to define the term bullets. They had bullets back then. They were just in a different form. They weren't cartridges like they are today, but they've always had bullets. That's that little lead thing that comes out of the end of your pistol or your rifle. Okay, and they had pistols back then too. They had double barrel things back here too, rifles. And replace it with the new 28th Amendment. That guarantees states can have state militias, aka state National Guards, which are made up of citizen soldiers who are called upon in times of natural disasters or other state emergencies. Why change that in the Constitution when all you're doing is redefining National Guard? If you're trying to just redefine National Guard, just leave it alone. Just call it a state militia. Again, I hate to say this. I really do. I'm glad Michael Moore wasn't a founding father or framer of the Constitution. Can you imagine the document we'd have today if he was? And I honestly don't believe that the United States of America would be here today if he was. I don't think we'd be in existence as we are today if he was a founding father. Allows individuals to use guns for sport and gathering food, and guarantees everyone the right to be free of and protected from gun violence. In public safety comes ahead of an individual's right to own and fire a gun. Yes and no. Public safety comes ahead of an individual's right to own and fire a gun. Define that. And again, he doesn't really define these things. He just puts that out there. This is actually emotional. He's trying to get an emotional response, not a thought-filled response. If the numbers are true by the CDC and other folks, there's between 500,000 and 5 million instances per year where a gun deters crime. But the only way we know that, because there hasn't been any scientific studies, is just by people answering questionnaires saying, yes, this happened to me. Again, like yesterday, you're not going to have a criminal running to a cop and say, that person over there, he brandished a gun at me while I was trying to rob this store. Now, our local country western station has a knucklehead of the day I can believe there might be some knuckleheads out there that might do that. Okay, so the use, that number, and this is one of those numbers that it's hard to figure out, because people don't report this to the police that this happened. And yet, I shared yesterday on the show that 1,800 prisoners in Detroit were asked a question, and overwhelmingly, most of them said they fear a citizen that could be carrying a gun more than they do a police, because citizens are all around them. Law-abiding citizens are around them, and they could be packing heat. So they fear that more than they do the cops. So that right there is a deterrent. It just can't be quantified. But it does happen. Just because it can't be quantified does not mean it doesn't happen, doesn't carry on. He goes on to say, this amendment would allow states and the federal government to pass laws that would regulate gun ownership in the following manner. As over 90% of gun violence is committed by men, in order for a man to purchase a gun, he must first get a waiver from his current wife, plus his most recent ex-wife, or any woman with whom he is currently in a relationship. If he's gay, he must give a waiver from his male spouse or partner. And I want to stop the reading there. How gender phobic of Michael Moore to say just gay being male. Okay, doesn't he talk about lesbians? But I know he's talking about men here, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, and what about the transgender folks out there? This law has greatly reduced most, and he says, he states this, and this is what gets me frustrated about this. He states this as a fact. This law has greatly reduced most spouse and domestic gun murders in Canada. And again, I tried to research this, and there's not a lot of information on this. Just like there was he put out later on, he talked about 77% of Americans don't own firearms, so why should 25% of Americans actually dictate to the rest of the country about that? And that's not true, because you go to Pew Research, and if you believe Pew Research, there is 53% of folks who currently own a gun or live with someone who does. So there's 53% of Americans, that adults, we're talking about American adults here, that either own a gun or currently live with somebody that does. And there's quite a few folks out there there's 57% that live in a household with no guns. But they also go down to say later on that 36% of the respondents that don't own guns said they would be open to that in the future. So contrary to what you'll hear about the 77%, and it's starting to filter down through social media, that's not an accurate number. And they never, and this is what frustrates me about the anti-freedom folks, they quote these things, and almost, I won't say never, 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 but almost never do they give you a link to back up their studies. I've asked how many times people put something out on Facebook or Twitter, and I said, please cite your sources, and they tell me just go research it. I'm saying it doesn't work that way. If you're going to spout something, at least cite your sources, okay? All automatic and semi-automatic guns are banned. No gun or clip can hold more than 6 bullets. To activate a gun for it to be used, the trigger must recognize the fingerprint of its registered owner. This will eliminate most crimes committed with a gun, as 80% of these crimes are done with a stolen gun. And trust me when I tell you, folks, I've read articles about this and I've seen videos about this. It's like anything else. That can be hacked and that can be got around. Sorry, there's nothing foolproof out there. And this would only tremendously add to the ownership cost of a gun, which is part of what they're trying to do. Oh, we don't want to take away your guns. We just want to make it so hard for you to get a gun that you're just going to drop it altogether. That's what their intent is, actually, or part of it anyway. One's guns must be stored at a licensed gun club or government-regulated gun storage facility. Believing that having a gun in your home provides you with protection is an American myth. People who die from a home invasion make up a sad but minuscule 0.04% of all gun murders in the U.S., and over a third of them are killed by their own gun that the criminal has either stolen or wrestled from them. Well, you know what would stop that stat is people actually getting some training. If you're going to have a gun in your home, get some training. The best one I can think of, there's a YouTube video out where this lady had a high point 9mm carbine in her house. Her husband had left it with her for self-defense in a home. And these guys were on the back porch trying to kick down the door to get into the house. She wasn't waiting for them to get into the door. They were kicking the door in, and she went to the closet to get the gun, came back out, and about the same time she got out there and was starting to aim towards the door, they had kicked the door open, and she started firing. There was no way those guys were going to get that gun from her because bullets were starting to spray already. Bullets were starting to spray already. So again, I know it may be only anecdotal, or anecdotal. To own and operate a gun, one must obtain a license like one does to operate a car. To get a license, you have to complete a gun training and safety course and pass through the background check. There are a lot of states that do that already. Okay, there are a lot of states out there that do the safety course before you can get a carry permit. Okay, I'm not against that. I think people should be trained. And I think if you live in a state that doesn't require that, I still think you need to train. I'm actually going to go out Saturday, Lord willing, and my muscles aren't too bad. My son's going to be at a range that's not too far away from here. It's a free range, and I want to break in my 9mm that I haven't fired yet. And but that's part of the training, knowing your weapon. And he keeps, I want to get some other stuff here for around time. It is, and I'm going to have I'm actually creating a video on this one also because I find it, I just find it funny that it didn't seem to me like there was a whole lot of thought put into this. It looked to me like there was just a lot of talking points. And a lot of things he put into his new Second Amendment were very subjective. The militia, helpful to the state. Okay, define helpful. The Second Amendment says necessary to the security, not the defense. Necessary to the security of a free state. Necessary is an objective term. It is necessary to the security of the state. And part of that necessity to security of the state is, and this is one thing that we forget about in our federalist system, our republic, is that the states are supposed to be defending its citizens from unconstitutional laws that the federal government passes. And there are a whole slew of unfederal laws and regulations that are unconstitutional. Anything that the EPA has put out is unconstitutional. Why do I know that? Go back to Article 1, Section 8, the Enumerated Powers Clause of the Constitution. And no, the general welfare and the common defense of the country are not enumerated powers. They are clauses. They are modifying clauses in the Constitution. They're not. General welfare is not a power. Is not a power. So you go back and you look in Article 1, Section 8. Okay? And part of Article 1, Section 8 is the Congress. Only the Congress, not the President, can call up the state militias. Now, up until the early 1900s, all we had were state militias. In 1900, they created the National Guard, which did not replace the militias. Because in order to replace the militias, you had to have a constitutional amendment to modify the clause in Article 1, Section 8 that talks about the militias, the state militias. So there's a lot of people out there that have that erroneous idea. So I'm really glad, I really am. I am really glad that Michael Moore was neither a founder nor a framer of the Constitution. Can you imagine? I would love for some of these anti-freedom folks out there to come up with a new Constitution, and I'm told there's some out there. I haven't really researched it a lot. Come up with a new Constitution that is better than the one we have. And better being a very subjective term. I know. But to me, the determining factor is the protecting of the people's freedoms and liberties. That is paramount. Okay, let me see here. I don't think I have any other articles up on. No, I don't. I just checked and see if I had any more articles up on Firefox on my production computer over here to show you. There's a couple things. I have about 13 minutes left. I want to make sure I get some of these in because, like I said, last weekend from Friday and Saturday, I had a whole different show set up to start Monday to set the tone for the whole week, and that went by the wayside, which is okay. I'm not complaining about it. That just went by the wayside. Okay. The Trump tax plan has been put out, and it is. I haven't gone over the whole thing. I don't think anybody else has really gone over the whole thing, and that's something that's still going to be put out in the wash because we just had passed the Congress or the House of Representatives has just passed the 2018 budget. Okay. And that is setting up for the tax plan because it has a lot of spending cuts in it, which those are all coming out. I'm going to try to research some of them over the weekend and talk about a few of them. Obviously, I can't talk about all of them on the show here. But I did lie to you a little bit there. Sorry. There is a toolkit. It's over at... And wait for it, folks. It's over at Digital Tax Scam, the digital tools kit. And you can download load it, and you can start looking at states. Now, I did some research on this, folks, and this was actually shared by Common Cause and Indivisible Guide. These two grassroots sites. Which aren't grassroots at all. These Indivisible Guide was built from the top down, not from the bottom up. And don't let them lie to you about that because that's exactly what happened. You go back and read their own, if they haven't changed it, read their own about. Political insiders actually started Indivisible Group. Oh, we're grassroots. They're political insiders. Okay? Anyway. Common Cause and Indivisible Guide is putting this out. It's a digital toolkit. And the one thing that you have to remember, and Robert B. Reich, I did a video weeks ago about him talking about, only the rich are going to benefit from this, and proved to you how that was wrong. That's another talking point, a narrative in their echo chamber of the anti-freedom crowd out there. But what I want to get at is a lot of these scorings by these groups, Indivisible Guide, Common Cause, Open Societies, these very anti-American, anti-freedom groups out there, these top-down supported groups, they score any conservative, I don't care if Republican or not, they score these tax plans statically. What do I mean by statically? They think there's only a certain pie, and that's it. They believe that the American economy is only so big, and that's it. And that's a static idea. What they fail to do, or what they fail to recognize, because first off, they don't like free market capitalism. They don't like the economy being controlled by the free market. They want to control it from Washington, D.C., so they have to score it statically to get the numbers that they want to make it look like it's less than something that it is. Now, if you allow people, I don't care if it's the top 1% of the 1% of the 1% in this country, if you allow them to keep more of their money, they put it to work. There's not anybody that I know of personally or have ever read that's in the 1%, the top 1% in the country of rich people, income earners, whatever, that do not invest their money. I don't know one of them that goes out and buries it in their backyards. Doesn't happen. They put it back to work for investing in other companies and other things, other capital. You ever heard of capital ventures or venture capital? Okay. So the anti-freedom folks out there, they score these, they judge these by a static economy that if people are allowed to keep more of their money, they don't recognize that as a potential in tax revenues. But and again, the problem with doing it statically is they don't take in that consideration of if the economy grows, and it's growing now, and we don't even have the tax cuts yet. It's growing because of the anticipation of the tax cuts with Donald Trump in the White House. Just look, folks. President Obama had 8 years. If you want to, and I don't, but a lot of people do, so let's use this thinking. President Obama had 8 years to turn the economy around, because there's a lot of people out there, at least 50% of the country, that believe that the presidents are responsible for the economy. I don't believe that. I think the best thing to do is for the president to get out of the way of the economy, and that's what, to a certain extent, not a great extent, but a certain extent, that's what President Trump has done. When it comes to regulation, he wants to cut taxes and everything. But what happens when you actually cut the taxes, the real tax dollars, and not give it as a stimulus package, not give it as a tax giveaway, you actually reduce the amount of taxes people pay, allow them to keep more of their money, then the economy grows. When the economy grows, more people are hiring more people. It isn't like Robert B. Rice said, if you allow the companies, corporations, to keep more of their money, all they're going to do is give the more golden parachutes to their CEOs and executives. Well, that's not the case. That's never been the case. They're almost all I was reading over some of the contracts of these CEOs, and also the publicly held companies have a fiduciary responsibility to make money for their shareholders. How do you do that? You have to expand. You either have to expand or you have to sell off assets, one of the two. But you have to do one of the two in order to generate money. And if you're expanding, you can only expand so far without hiring new employees, without putting up new facilities, no matter what your business is. So it stands to reason, if you're expanding, you're hiring more people, you're adding more people to the economy, they're making money, which they're spending in the economy, and there's more people being hired, i.e. taxpayers, so you're able to collect more revenue. That's very dynamic. And that's the problem with a lot of these anti-freedom folks out there, especially from Indivisible Guide and Common Cause, that really are bashing any type of tax cut. Schumer, Pelosi, any of the Democrats in Congress that are bashing this, they don't look at the economy as something that's dynamic. And it is. They don't like free market capitalism. But that's the only way you grow the economy. You cannot grow the economy by spending. Keynes, Paul Krugman, the Democratic Party, Indivisible Guide, and Common Cause are all wrong when it comes to capitalism. They haven't got a clue because they are big government types. They think the government should be the one to control the economy. Our economy is way too big for that. Any economy is bigger than anything the government can do for it, i.e. Venezuela. Enough said. Okay, enough said. But there's this toolkit. These links will be up in there. You can go look at it yourself. It'll tell you what the top 1%, what their tax cut's going to be, and some middle class families. They don't say some of the top 1%. They just put down it as being the 1%, and then some middle class families, they're going to get a tax increase, which isn't correct, because again, even though, and what they're doing is they're scoring us under the old system and not the new system. The new system, the first of a married couple, me and my wife are a married couple, the first $24,000 we make are tax exempt. And it's the $24,001 and above that we get taxed on. So technically instead of having three lower, there's actually a fourth, which is a zero. Anywhere from $0 to $24,000 is tax exempt. So just that there alone throws their numbers totally off. If you're going to be truthful and score something right, score it according to what is proposed, not what is right now. It doesn't make sense to do that, and this is one of the lies that the left does. This is one of the ways that the left lies to the American people. Okay, I have other things in there. There's a anti-freedom think tank in there, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. If you read through some of their postings, very anti-Trump, very anti-free market, very anti-capitalistic. And how are you going to get an accurate facts from these folks? It's very biased on the websites. There is a good there is a good from Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge. Here's Trump's tax plan. And Tyler and ZeroHedge.com have proven to be very accurate. And he tries to keep any of his biases out of this and reporting these things. He has a good article over there on Here is the Trump tax plan. He posted this back on the 27th. That had been last week, last Wednesday. And this one, real quick here, I only got a couple minutes left. Trump has been great for the economy, the anti-Trump economy, that is. And this is over the Washington Post by Ben Terrace. Now, you gotta realize who owns the Washington Post. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Now, and this boggles my mind, for somebody who has built an empire with Amazon to be this leftist in his politics, it baffles me. And he goes in and talks about in that article, it's a good read for you to go and read, talks about how he's been good for the grassroots folks that are against Donald Trump. And again, I put that grassroots in quotations because everything I've read about Common Cause, and especially Indivisible Guide, that's one of the newer ones, it's a top-down. It's from political insiders who actually started these groups. But what they were trying to do was catch the country on fire like the Tea Party groups, who were actually grassroots. They were started at the local level. They had no national organization to guide them. That came way later. Tea Party was actually an organic grassroots. Indivisible Guide, Common Cause, any of the people that open sources, George Soros's open sources, actually supports top down. They're artificial grassroots. You got to remember that. I'm slowly running out of time here. There was another one I really wanted to get to, but it's not that important. It's called Blue Slips, Legislative Process 101. And I touched on this last week. I just want a real quick touch on this. If there is a judicial nomination for the federal government, the federal bench, either the Supreme Court or the federal bench, the two senators from whoever that nominee state where they're coming from, I get that out straight here quick, they get these blue slips whether they want to support them or not. And traditionally they say that their recommendations from the two state senators is heeded by the Judicial Committee. What happens if the two senators from that state are a couple of horses patoots? At least in their actions or thoughts and everything like that. I just wanted to put that out there, folks. It amazes me how these anti-freedom folks call these things traditions, and yet, I just got to say this: if you look at what they do, actions speak louder than words. If they're not adhering to the Constitution, then why trust them in the appointment of someone that is appointed through the Constitution? I'm just putting it out there for you. Music's on there, folks. It's the end of the show, but fear not, I'll be back with you Monday at 12 noon. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless. And remember, on Sunday, attend the church of God's choice, not your choice. And we'll see you Monday at noon.